Okay, so the last couple weeks I talked about where plants grow and how plants grow. And this week I'm going to be talking about growing plants, actually planting and growing them for yourself on purpose, which isn't how most of the herbs in my practice get to me. I get a lot of my herbs from the wild, and I think that's a fine and very good way to get them. But I do like to grow some things too, and this is the time of year for it. So I'm putting this part of the course at the very beginning or close to the beginning because it's seasonally appropriate. Herbs can be a really great thing to grow in your garden or in containers if you don't have outdoor space. If you have pots on windows or whatever kind of space you have, that can be, it's often enough to be able to grow some of the things that you would want to have. It doesn't take a lot of land to grow herbs, and so they have very traditionally been something that people have grown for themselves. Right along with vegetables and other things, but probably even more so than vegetables and grains and other crops. Herbs, because they have a tendency to grow themselves very easily, herbs have a way of following you home if you're a gatherer. So I've often had the experience of herbs growing at my house from seeds that were brought to my house when I went out and harvested things from the wild. And probably the most dramatic example that I can think of in recent times, I will show to you. And this is, let's see. So this is a mullein plant, this tall fuzzy thing growing next to my mobile clinic, the medicine wagon. And the way that it got there was that I had some mullein that I brought home, and I laid it across the wagon tongue on the front of the wagon, and some of the seeds fell or washed into a crack in the pavement of my driveway and started growing there. So sometimes growing herbs is just as simple as that. And so, no, hang on. And so because it is such an easy thing to do, I speculate that people have been growing herbs, growing medicinal plants for probably just about as long as they've been growing anything. Might have been some of the first things people started intentionally growing. By just scattering the seeds in a likely place and then coming back for them, which is often all you have to do with herbs. You don't necessarily have to do a lot of labor intensive stuff to grow them. And the reason for that is partly that herbs don't have a lot of calories in them. When you're trying to grow food, you've got to grow calories. You need lots of sun energy to fall on them, and they need fertile soil and things like that. Herbs don't necessarily need that because you're not necessarily trying to grow them for the food energy that's in them. You're trying to grow them for, as we discussed before, the secondary phytochemicals, the medicinal substances that are there in tiny amounts and don't necessarily take a lot of energy to produce for the plant, and therefore don't take a lot of labor for the humans growing them to get them to grow. With some plants, there are exceptions to that. There are some plants that are very hard to grow. Orchids are a famous example. They can be very tricky about where they will and won't grow. And there are some orchids out there with some wonderful medicinal properties, but I very seldom use them just because they're not so easy to source in a good way. So with the case of herbs, there's sort of a process of selection about what you want to grow. And maybe you want to grow orchids, maybe you think that would be a fun thing to do and it would be a very involved project and you would get very little plant material out of it. but you could do it that way if it were interesting to you. But usually, because gardening is not my main thing, I choose things that are easy to grow, and there are plenty of them. So ease of growing is a really big criteria for me for choosing which herbs I'm going to try and grow in my garden versus which herbs I might gather from the wild or which ones I might uh, purchase or trade for or something like that. So there are a few that I like to grow that I grow on a regular basis to supply my practice here. And there are, I think if you are not at the stage of doing like a community-wide practice, but just practicing for some friends and family, just, working on a smaller group of people, then it's a lot easier to grow an appropriate amount of a given herb for that group of people with a wider range of herbs too. So I want to talk about some of the herbs that I like to grow to use for medicine that I find to be easy to grow, prolifically producing, and versatile in terms of their application, meaning that I can use them for a bunch of different stuff, and that they're safe and that they're strong to give to people. Safe and effective, abundant, not too labor intensive, and having broad application. You don't necessarily want to grow an herb that you would only need in a very limited set of circumstances, although you might want to grow that. It might be fun for you too, but it's not necessarily the most practical thing in terms of labor versus what you get out of it. So I want to talk about some of the herbs that I like to grow for those types of situations that meet those criteria. And one of them, which I just harvested for the first time this year, and I will harvest, this year wasn't the first time I harvested it. This past weekend was the first time this year that I harvested it. I will harvest it a few more times over the course of the year. And that is lemon balm. Lemon balm is a really nice plant because it has a couple of different things that it's good for. It's calming and it helps to promote sleep. So soothes the nerves and promotes sleep is one of the things that it does. It also helps to break fevers. If somebody has a fever, take some lemon balm tea or some other form of lemon balm will tend to make them sweat, and that will tend to break the fever. So it's a really useful plant for that. It also helps with digestion a little bit. Lemon balm's a member of the mint family, and the mint family are very they're tenacious. Once they're planted in an area, they will keep growing in that area. They will often spread to adjacent areas. They drop a lot of seeds, and in addition to dropping seeds, they reproduce vegetatively, meaning that a little piece of the root will grow along the ground and a new plant will come up a few inches away from the original plant. That's an exact clone of the original plant. It has the exact same DNA. It doesn't require pollination or anything like that for that to happen. It's just growing a new version of itself a little ways down the garden bed or whatever. So as long as they have sunlight, and they'll tolerate shade, they just won't produce as much in shade. As long as it has sunlight or partial shade, but some sunlight, it will produce lots of leaves, and they're good medicine. So lemon balm is one that I grow. During the pandemic, I used lemon balm very extensively. I'm not seeing so many cases of COVID or the flu or anything like that right now, but I've always used it for that type of illness, flu-like illnesses, febrile illnesses, stuff like that, because it relaxes people, it soothes the body aches and things like that, and it also helps with the fever. It may have some actual antiviral properties where it keeps the viruses from being able to reproduce, but that's a hard thing to measure in a human being. So even though you'll often see it described as antiviral, and even though I've called it antiviral myself because of how it's used clinically, it might not literally be destroying viruses or keeping them from working, but it is helping the body's response to the viruses to be better. So lemon balm is one that I grow often. Many other mints fall into the same category of just needing somewhere to grow that gets some sun, and you can harvest from them multiple times a year. This is true of spearmint, peppermint. It's true of basil. Needs more direct sunlight and a little bit better soil, but you can grow quite a bit of basil a lot of the time. It's a little bit pickier. There are some other herbs, medicinal herbs like motherwort that fit in the same category of being just very easy to grow, very like weed-like once they get started, and you can harvest from them multiple times a year. You don't pull them up, you just come along with scissors and clip most of them down, and what's still there keeps growing and keeps spreading. It's often a good idea to grow these plants in a bucket or other large container if you don't want them to become weeds spreading throughout your garden, because they will if they get the chance. They'll take over a flower bed or a tilled area. They won't grow as much in an area that's just grass or something like that, although they will come up here and there. But if you have like a big flower bed and you think you're going to have lemon balm in one corner of it, you'll have lemon balm in one corner of it this year, but next year you might have lemon balm in the entire thing. So sometimes it's good to grow them in a container of some sort. Also in the same mint family, and being fairly but not quite as easy to grow, you would have sage, oregano, marjoram, and lavender. Lavender and rosemary are a little bit more specialized. They like a lot of sun. They don't tolerate cold as well. They're kind of Mediterranean plants. But they are very growable here in temperate Eastern North America in the summertime. And if you have them in pots or something where you can bring them in for the winter, you can overwinter them and put them back out the next year, and they will grow for years and years. So all of those are aromatic plants in the mint family that are reasonably easy to grow and that you can grow plenty of for a family, probably enough for a big circle of friends really easily. And with a little bit of work, you can grow enough to support a community practice with 1,000 patients, should you ever have occasion to do so. So they're prolific. They're very strong medicines, and they are very safe medicines. And that's a lovely thing about garden herbs, is that most of the ones that we traditionally grow are, kitchen herbs. They're very safe, and they contain a lot of aromatic compounds. They contain a lot of medicinal substances, a large proportion of medicinal substances. And that's why they've been selected for the role of being kitchen herbs. So those are really good things to grow, easy things to grow, and things that you can grow plenty of. Another one that I always grow, and that I can easily grow enough of for my entire practice in just a very small amount of space. I think last year I used 2 5-gallon buckets full of potting soil. And that is this stuff right here, Cayenne. This is a tincture of cayenne. I go through about 3 of this size jar, 3 or 4 of this size jar in a year, and probably a similar sized amount of salve. And all of that can be made from just a few pounds of spicy peppers, cayenne peppers. So cayenne is also easily purchasable. So it's not like you have to grow it or you can't get good quality stuff, but it's fun to grow. It produces, it's in my opinion, it's nice looking. You know, it has these red icicle shaped peppers on it, and it produces for a long time. If you plant it now, and it will keep making peppers all the way up into October or so, all the way up until there's a hard freeze, really. If you cover it with something, it will survive a light frost, and it will keep making peppers up until it freezes really hard, and then it'll die for the year. I mean, it's an annual, so it'll die and you'll have to replace it the following year, but you'll get multiple months of continuous bearing out of it. So it doesn't just make all of its fruit at once the way that say, you know, a blackberry bush does or something like that. It makes fruit on an ongoing basis from a few weeks after it's planted until it gets to be frozen outside. So that's a really good one to know about. Later, I'm going to talk more about the medicinal properties of cayenne, but it's a very fascinating herb, and it's a very powerful medicine, and has a pretty impressive history of use for multiple different issues. Similarly, garlic, you need a little more space to grow garlic, but it's not hard to grow. If you get a few heads of garlic and you break it apart into cloves and you bury them in the ground, you just kind of dig up a flower bed or a little garden bed. I usually grow mine in two, let's see, what are the dimensions? I think they're like 3x6 raised beds, but they don't have to be raised beds. They can just be an area that's been dug up and turned over. You just plant the cloves in the ground, and then they grow. And then when you go and harvest them later on, each clove is turned into a whole head of garlic. And so you have many times as much garlic as you put in the ground. And it's kind of magical. You just you plant a little clove of garlic and you pull up a big head of garlic later on. And that's really all you have to do. You don't have to do anything to it. You don't have to, I mean, you might want to water it if it's really dry outside, but around here it rains often enough that you really don't have to. That might vary depending on the environment where you live, but it's a very easy thing to grow. It's not very subject to predation. You know, rabbits don't eat it, bugs don't eat it. Only us crazy humans can stand the taste of it. So it's a very easy thing to grow, and again, a very strong medicine that's very safe. So it's a really good one to have. It's a good thing to have plenty of because of its medicinal properties, which I will talk about those two in more depth in a little bit here. But one of the easiest things to grow, and also you can grow it in the fall. You can plant it in November, and then it will start growing in the winter time and be ready to harvest in the springtime. And so you can actually grow it. You can grow 2 batches of it a year if you want to, but you probably won't need to because you just don't need that much garlic in for medicine. But it can be life-saving to have it when you do need it. So garlic is a really good one to grow. For me, I like to have, when I'm growing things in a garden type of setting, I like to have things that are going to come to fruition fairly soon. When I'm out in the woods, if I'm working with a stand of wild plants, which I'll talk about more in a future class, but I'm used to the idea that you have to wait 6 years to harvest a ginseng plant. You have to wait 12 years to harvest a trillium plant. You might have to wait 20 years to harvest an orchid. So I don't grow those things in my garden. I let those things and I let them grow and facilitate them growing in their natural environment. But I don't try to cultivate them really. And some other people might do that differently. Trees are kind of an exception to that. It can be a good thing to grow certain types of trees in your property if you have property or in land that you would have access to later. And when I was younger and I didn't have any land, I actually planted some trees in various different places that are now mature trees or somewhat mature trees that aren't on land that belongs to me, but they're on land that I can go to and I know where they are. So hawthorn is an example of a tree that I have planted before and will likely plant again. Hawthorn has in the springtime, in May, around May Day, it has leaves and flowers that can be harvested for medicinal use. And in the autumn, it has, I call them berries. They're really more like tiny apple type things, but it has these little fruits on it that can be harvested for medicinal use. And hawthorn is an herb for the heart. And it takes several years, somewhere like 8 or 10 years before it starts flowering and fruiting and all of that sort of thing. And maybe longer than that before it's a fully mature tree. And then once it is a fully mature tree, it can live a very long time, longer than people do. So when you're planting trees, you're kind of potentially planting a legacy for future generations. So things like hawthorn and walnut, things like that, they're nice trees to have around. But don't plant them because you're counting on having the medicine soon, obviously. There are some smaller trees like sassafras. They can be harvested when they are still small trees. It's something like 2 or 3 years. So having those around, if you had a lot of space for them, might be a reasonable thing to do too. But for the most part, I'm growing annuals and perennials that are mature quickly and using those as medicine. Hello, welcome to the class. So the I tend to focus on because I'm not trying to make gardening my whole life. Maybe when I'm old and retired or something like that, I will. But right now, gardening isn't my whole life. So I don't grow things that take a whole lot of input from me. Another great example of something that I like to grow is raspberries. Raspberry fruit is good food. Raspberry leaves are good medicine, and traditionally used as a uterine tonic, something that helps with fertility. They're also just kind of nutritive and make a nice, pleasant beverage that tastes a lot like black tea but doesn't have caffeine in it. So they're easy to grow. They're small bushes, and once you get them planted, once you get them started, they just grow and grow, and you don't really have to. Well, depending on the type of raspberry, some of them do better if you come and cut them down every couple of years and they grow back from the roots. Our native black raspberries that grow around here as a wild plant, and which I also have a big stand of in my backyard. They don't need you to do that. They just they put out fruit on the parts of the bush that grew last year. So the new stuff that grew this year is like a light green color, and it's very soft, and it doesn't have fruits and flowers on it yet. It just has leaves. And then the stuff from last year is more woody and purplish, and it puts out the flowers and the fruit. So I harvest leaves from my raspberry plants 4 times a year. And I harvest my lemon balm about 4 times a year. Nettles can also be harvested that often. Nettles are a pretty easy thing to grow. And they're good food. They can be cooked and eaten as a green. They can also be dried or used fresh in tincture as medicine for allergies and as something to stimulate the kidneys. So they're good medicine. They grow in a more shady, woodsy type of area. Like if you had some land that ended in a creek, they would grow near the creek, that kind of thing. They don't in North America, they don't do so well out in yards and gardens. In Europe, they do great in that kind of environment. In Northern Europe, where I've been, there might be parts of North America where they do all right too, but not around here. They just need more shade. So both of those are things that you could consider growing if you had the right environment for them. But raspberries are not picky about where they grow, and they're pleasant to have for the food aspect as well as the medicine aspect. So I'm really a fan of multi-use crops. They also are great wildlife habitat. Birds will build nests in them. Sometimes animals will nest under them or burrow under them because they're kind of protected from larger animals in amongst the thorns. I had an amazing experience involving raspberries a couple years ago where I was out in the raspberries, kind of squatted down picking berries off of them, and one of my chickens hopped over, and this chicken had her foot was not shaped the way that a chicken's foot is normally shaped, and so she walked with a little bit of a limp. And so she came over, and I thought she was coming over to beg food the way chickens and many other animals do. So I asked her if she wanted a berry and reached it out to her. She kind of flattened herself against the ground like she was scared. And I was puzzled for a moment, and then she jumped backwards and winged backwards for a few paces, and a red-tailed hawk crashed into the berry bush right in front of where she had just been. So she kind of seemingly lured it away from the other chickens and got it to crash into the thorns right in front of me, right in front of where the human was. And so it squeaked, and then it flew away, and then some of these smaller neighborhood hawks saw it and made a bunch of noise and escorted it out of the neighborhood. We have these little hawks called Cooper's hawks that are about the size of a crow. And then we have red-tailed hawks, which are they're not as, well, in some parts of the English-speaking world, they'd be considered buzzards rather than hawks. Around here, we call vultures buzzards. But anyway, they're a different kind of creature, and they're quite a lot bigger. Cooper's hawks are a little bit small to bother most chickens. Red-tailed hawks will definitely go after chickens. So anyway, she kind of used the raspberry bushes to her advantage against a predator, and a lot of animals do. And so it does, if you have it on your property, it does create a habitat for wildlife as well, which some gardeners don't want. I personally love it. I want to have like biodiversity in my space. I want to have cardinals, and I want to have, rabbits and all kinds of things. And then just take measures to keep them from eating my other plants that I don't want them to eat. There's plenty of plants like the grass that I don't mind them eating. So raspberries can be a nice microhabitat, and they can also be good for food and good for medicine. And all of that kind of goes together in my mind, because you want to have a healthy environment, healthy diet, and healthy medicine all in the same types of place. So if you are going to grow plants for medicine, it's it takes some planning to do it with the best results. I mean, you can just go out and get seeds and scatter them and plant them and make it up as you go along. Especially when you're first getting started, that might not be such a bad idea. You know, the enthusiasm and the experimentality of it all can be a really good thing. But it can also be really helpful in terms of productivity and everything to have some plans and to know what you're growing and know what you hope to get out of growing it, so that you can choose things wisely. So to that end, I think it can be good to have a little garden notebook that you write down ideas for, and that you write down dates that you planted things, and dates that you harvested things. And that really helps you going forward. It helps you to get more acquainted with your environment, which I find to be a very, very vital and often missing piece for herbalists, is to be acquainted with and kind of in tune with the cycle of the seasons. And keeping a garden journal can be really helpful for that. And if you are gardening, it only takes a few extra minutes to do that. So, just jotting down some notes. Who did we get these seeds from? And what date were they planted? And then what date were they harvested? And that sort of thing. And anything you might have noticed about them, like things that any mischance that might have been befallen them, or what seemed to help them grow, and that sort of thing. So that's a really, it's a good practice. It's a good learning experience. And I think even if long-term you decide you don't want to grow herbs for your own practice, that it can be good to have the experience of having done it and understanding what it's like and what it would be like to do it, and what you would learn from it. Learning what you would learn from it is an important thing to do. Another thing that can be helpful when you're getting started, that can save people a lot of grief, is to get a soil test kit, which you can often buy from garden stores. And this will allow you to test the pH of your soil and some other things like that. And it kind of lets you know more about what's going on with the soil, because certain plants will grow much better in certain soil conditions. So that's something that feels like an extra step, but it's really not that much work, and it can really make a big difference in having a very disappointing gardening year versus having a very successful one. So I think that it's worth the extra half hour and $25 or whatever it's going to cost to do that. That being said, I've had a lot of years that I didn't use them, and I've had a lot of perfectly successful times that I got away with not using one. But I think on the whole, it's a wise thing to do. So, when you're planning things out, look around at where you want to grow things, where you think might be, what plants you think might find different areas helpful. So if you have a shady spot, you might want to look up what plants will grow, what herbs will grow well in a shady place, or what herbs will grow well in full sun, or what herbs will grow well in pots on a windowsill if you don't have outdoor space, or that sort of thing. What herbs can grow from seed without a lot of human input if you don't have any place to grow. I used to do something called guerrilla gardening, where you just plant seeds in places that aren't really your places, but where you want them to grow. And this would often consist of just, scattering some seeds in, say, going to a construction site where everything is stirred up and bulldozed, and spreading some seeds and then letting things come up. Not really an active ongoing process of gardening, but just sort of scattering seeds and seeing what comes up. And I often did that with the seeds from things that I gathered. And some plants, some herbs lend themselves really well to that. Some don't. The mints do, but they can become invasive, so it's not necessarily recommended to use them. There is a plant called jewelweed that is a really common medicinal plant. And if you're working with damp ground, it can be induced to grow in places and will sometimes grow there for years to come. Mulleins the same way. It'll grow in gravel. It will grow in very poor soil. So, even when I was homeless as a teenager, I still grew some medicinal plants. So it's not something that you necessarily have to own land or be in possession of land to do. But these days there are also, in a lot of places, especially exist here in Lexington, community gardens where you can get a garden plot that's part of a space that's set aside for gardening. And that can be a useful thing to do if you don't have a specific place where you're living that you can grow things. And sometimes, even if it's just like maybe your yard's all shady, you could grow some things that like sun in that kind of an environment. So those are some, possibilities to consider. Like I said, you might decide that gardening and growing herbs is not for you, but I think that especially as you're learning to be an herbalist, I think a lot of your power as an herbalist comes from your connection to the plants as living things and your understanding of how plants grow and how plants make their medicine and so forth. I think that really deepens and enhances your understanding of medicinal plants to such an extent that I really think that it is worth the trouble for people to at least try out growing stuff and, learn what they're going to learn from it. Also, a nice thing about growing herbs is that if you do have a space that you're gardening, you will get medicinal plants that you did not plant yourself. And sometimes you might even get more of those than what you did plant. I had one year that I planted basil in a particular area. And at first the basil was doing really great. And then something happened. I don't really remember what it was or why it happened, but almost all of it died. And instead I started getting a lot of mugwort. And so at first I was plucking out the mugwort because it wasn't what I was trying to grow. And then when the last basil plant died, I said, okay, I guess this is a mugwort bed now. And so I let the mugwort grow, and it did well. It grew, and it's a good medicinal plant. It's not what I wanted. It's not what I asked for, but it's useful all the same. And so I let it grow and harvested it and dried it and made medicine from it. And, you'll get that sort of thing sometimes. And very often you'll get things like dandelions coming up in between the plants, or in this environment, there's another herb called lamb's quarters that often comes up in gardens. Wild lettuce is a frequent weed in garden beds. And these are all medicinal things that are quite useful and that we will learn about individually later on in the course. Okay, yeah, sorry, let's see. What have I done? Oh. Sorry. Okay. So I had a question asking about the herb walk for this month. That is going to be Saturday, the 27th. It's going to be at 11 a.m. and it is um, my thought right now is to have this take place at a park in Lexington called Heisel Farm Park, which is on the north side of town. It's kind of out past the north side of town. It's a sort of out of town. I mean, technically it's in Lexington, but it doesn't really look like Lexington. It looks like the country, but it is a city park called Heisel Farm Park, and it's got a lot of open fields and a little bit of forested or wooded areas and ponds and things like that. So we'll probably spend a couple hours there. If you want to bring friends or bring children or anything like that, that's very much fine. Yeah, so that is the 27th, Saturday the 27th. All right, so with growing plants, yeah, I think it's a really good practice, a really good thing to do, even if you're just growing a few things in a pot on the windowsill. That can be a good thing to do too. And there are a few things, that will grow well in that type of situation. You can't obviously grow very much, but aloe is a very traditional plant in this culture to grow in that type of situation. Because most of our kitchens have windows, and because aloe is used for a burn, which people usually get in the kitchen, a lot of people keep an aloe plant on the kitchen windowsill and just break off a leaf from it and rub the slimy inner sap on a burn should one occur. And that's a really, an easy way to have a relationship with a specific plant. And I have aloe plants in my house that I've had for 20 years, and they're long lived and practical and useful and everything like that. And when you're not using it for medicinal purposes, it's a houseplant. There are other things like rosemary and thyme that you might use as kitchen herbs that you might use in cooking that you could grow in a small container in the kitchen, or in a few pots outside on the balcony or porch or something like that. So trying to grow a little bit of plants, even if you have a limited amount of space. And like I said, a bucket or two with some cayenne pepper plants in it will produce a lot of medicine. Similarly with the garlic, you can produce, with some things, you can produce the medicine that you need in a very small amount of space. And it doesn't have to be a weird exotic medicine. Like I have in the past had containers here in the clinic, like terrariums that I've grown plants in. And I've grown aloe. I still do have aloe growing here, but I've also grown golden seal, which is a woodland plant. In that kind of context, golden seal is slow growing and it takes a couple years to make roots, but it was neat to have it growing in the clinic and be able to point it out to people. And so I've had that sort of thing growing here before, and I've had aloe. There's another herb called squill. Squill is it's a poisonous plant, but a slice of it put over a wound will help draw out any object from the wound. And so it's not something you have a lot of occasion to use, but it's an interesting plant to have around, and it's easy to grow. So, even if it's just a few potted plants, or if you've got a bigger situation, maybe it could be a big garden or a few garden beds or a few containers outside. Lots of ways to scale this. But the part of it that I think is a great learning experience, and really in a way almost a required learning experience to be a fully developed herbalist, is just being with a plant and nurturing it through its life cycle and getting to see it grow, getting to see it come to fruit or come to maturity, and getting to make medicine from stuff that you get from that plant. Those are really good learning experiences for you to have as an herbalist. They will give you depth and texture to your understanding of herbal medicine that somebody might not have who had only learned out of books or only learned from courses like this. It's experiential, and so that's one of the main reasons that I recommend it so highly, is that it really just kind of involved you doing something with your whole self and learning from it. And, plus you get some medicine out of the deal as well. But at least at first, the medicine isn't the most important thing you're getting out of it. It's the experience and the understanding of the plants, and getting to see how the plants turn air and sunshine into powerful medicines and foods. So that's now is the time to get started if you want to do that this year. I know that everybody's got a lot going on this year, and this might not be the best time for it, but if you decide that it is a good time for it, now is when you would want to get started with most things, with planting things. So we're past the danger of frost, but we're not into such a hot, dry part of the year that it's hard for things to get started. And so, just as a short list, anything in the mint family, Lamiaceae, which includes the true mints, spearmint and peppermint and so forth, as well as some things like rosemary and sage and lavender, and marjoram and oregano. Those are all in the mint family. Quite a few things in the sunflower family, like marigolds, calendula, chamomile, very easy to grow. Most of those plants are have a sort of a weed-like nature. They're related to dandelions, and they grow sort of like dandelions. So those are things that you can grow pretty easily in a wide variety of soil. Garlic, peppers, those are good plants to get started with as far as herbaceous plants. The raspberries I mentioned as far as shrubs go. Elderberries, small trees, they only take a couple of years to get, maybe 2 or 3 years to get full size and start bearing fruit. So those can be, they're more like bushes than trees in a way. So elderberries and raspberries can be good to grow if you have the space for them. And they're, pretty useful medicines and foods as well. And we'll talk about all their medicinal properties later. But those are some examples of some really good things to grow in gardens. And of course, aloe. In where I live, aloe is pretty much strictly an indoor plant. If you try and grow aloe outside in Kentucky, the rain's going to kill it. But lots of people grow it indoors, and it's useful for that. So, it depends a lot on the space that you have, but those are some pretty decent suggestions for plants to get started with. And if you have the opportunity to, like I said, you can scale it as small as a couple of containers on your windowsill, or as big as you want to go with it. But the learning experience, as well as having a source of herbs that where they've been from the entire time that they were growing until the time that you give the medicine to the person that you're trying to help, that's a really powerful integration. It's a really powerful bringing together of the different steps of the process, all under your own control and under your own care. So that's something that growing plants can help us to do. And later we'll talk about harvesting plants from the wild and how to do that ethically. which is another way to source them. But growing them is a really good learning experience, and right now is prime gardening season. So if you happen to be gardening anyway, planting some medicinal plants can be a great idea. And if you really want to get a different kind of understanding of medicinal plants than what you would get from reading books and listening to lectures, then gardening is one of the ways for you to do that. And that's part of my goal with this course, is to give you as many different ways as possible to experience plants, so that you will have a more in-depth understanding of them and be more able to use them than just what you would be able to get from listening to me talk. So this is something that I think is a really good way to help teach yourself, is to get your hands in the dirt and start experiencing with all your senses how plants grow and how they become medicine. Any questions about the growing herbs? Well, should you run into any questions in the process of trying to do so, feel free to reach out to me. So I wanted to talk about Cayenne, which I mentioned before. Cayenne is native to South America, and it is the species name is Capsicum annuum. There are a few different kinds of Capsicum annuum, and Cayenne is the name that we give to long, skinny, spicy Capsicum annuum. There is also bell peppers, which are the same species, but they're round and not spicy. Whew. And there are also paprika peppers, which are shaped just like cayenne peppers, but are not spicy. And all of those are the same species. So the spicy ones that we think of as Cayenne is actually the name of a place where they were being cultivated. And I think it was the Spanish Empire that kind of introduced them into international commerce. And since then, they've become, part of the traditional cuisine of a lot of different places. So it's really hard to imagine Thai food without spicy peppers, but Thailand didn't have spicy peppers up until, I don't know, 15 or 1600s. So they've spread all over the world and become medicine and food all over the world. But they're really native to a particular place and were cultivated in a particular place by the people who lived there before colonialism, and then kind of were spread from there to the rest of the world. So yeah, that's the question. What is it about cayenne that makes it good for cleansing? Well, here's what cayenne does. Okay, cayenne contains a substance called capsaicin. Capsaicin is the spicy stuff. And so it's what's in cayenne pepper that is not in paprika and bell peppers. Capsaicin is really interesting what it does. It changes the way that our nerves conduct electricity. Let's see, how do I explain this well? Inside of our nerves, there are these sort of electrical circuits called ion-gated channels. And these are pathways where electrolytes conduct electricity. And there's one particular one of these that is used by the nervous system for sensing heat. And at a certain temperature, it starts conducting electricity through the movement of calcium ions, through the movement of electrolyte, of calcium as an electrolyte. So Cayenne makes that pathway open at a normal temperature. So we interpret Cayenne as being hot, and your cells interpret Cayenne as being hot, or as the temperature as being hot when it's come in contact with Cayenne, even though the plant itself, if you were to, feel it with your hand, it's not actually hot. It's at room temperature. The glass is cool to the touch, but when you put it in your mouth, it's like, oh, I'm burning. So it actually creates the illusion of heat in your nervous system by opening this electrical circuit that is sensitive to heat. And when that happens, your body has a bunch of physical responses to the heat, the perceived heat. And one of those physical responses is that blood vessels open up. In the normal course of things, the blood vessels opening up allows more fluid to flow through, and the fluid takes the heat with it, or it allows sweating to happen, which helps to dissipate heat. In this case, there's no heat to dissipate, but there's still an increase in circulation. There's still an increase in sensitivity, and there's an increase in sweating. So all of these things are moving the fluids in the body. And that can be useful for cleansing because it's helping to move waste products out of that area and move nutritive, oxygenated, circulating blood into that area. So, for example, a really clear-cut example of toxins accumulating in an area would be gout in someone's joints. Gout is a condition where acid crystals crystallize out of the blood and collect in the joints and cause pain because the crystals are small needle-like, small needle-like crystals. They're like little shards, and they can cause pain and swelling. So cayenne taken internally or cayenne salve applied to the area locally helps that feel warm, helps blood flow through it, and helps to dissolve those crystals, which are then filtered out of the body by the kidneys and excreted through the kidneys. So cayenne is helping to facilitate that by helping raise the temperature there by increasing the blood flow, and also by helping to move the waste products that have been deposited there away. So that's a big part of what cayenne does. It also induces more sweating, and sweating takes certain substances out of your body as well. Salts, urea, things like that are coming out in your sweat. Sweating too much can be depleting, but breaking a good hard sweat and then rehydrating yourself and things like that can be really healthy. And it's been used in a lot of traditional medical systems around the world. Sweating has been used for cleansing, for tonifying, for making people feel better, especially after an illness or during a long chronic illness, something like that. So it's really useful for helping to facilitate that. And in the late 1700s, early 1800s, there was a major trend in domestic medicine here in the United States. Not really what doctors were doing, but what people were doing for themselves. There was a person named Thompson who really promoted the use of cayenne and a couple other herbs for cleansing and for relieving all sorts of conditions. And he did that along with sweat houses, which was something that he had learned about from Native American people, for whom sweat lodges are, they have a spiritual aspect, but they're also very much something that is considered to be healthy for the body, and promote healing and that sort of thing. So he kind of took that concept and added in some herbs and things like that that were not necessarily traditional here, but that were maybe similar to ones that were in some ways. Well, one of them that he used a lot, lobelia, is very traditional throughout North America. Cayenne's really from South America, but I'm not sure, you know, how I'm not very familiar with the traditional medicine in South America, and as far as how it's used in the cultural context that it originated in. But I wouldn't be surprised if it's used in that way in that area. So that's basically what it's doing, is it's helping people sweat more, and it's also helping blood flow more and take waste products with it, and warming up the body. And so all of that is part of how it does cleansing. In addition to that, it's also really good for pain relieving by being what's called a counter irritant, which a counter irritant is a very widespread idea in traditional medicine around the world. And the idea is that by creating pain, a superficial pain, you decrease a deeper, more powerful pain. So in the case of Cayenne, somebody could, for instance, put a Cayenne liniment or Cayenne salve on a sore muscle, for instance, and it'll make the skin feel warm and tingly, and that warmth and tingliness will actually use up the there's a neurotransmitter, a substance that the body uses to transmit messages along the nerves called substance P. P stands for pain. So this is sort of the message, or the substance that the body uses to send the message of pain. And using something like Cayenne that will cause some warmth and just a mild burning on the skin can use that up and take away from a deeper ache that that might have been more severe. So, for example, Cayenne liniment for lower back pain can be really helpful. Lower back pain can be a hard thing to treat. A lot of the time, people with lower back pain end up on narcotic drugs that have diminishing returns, where at first they're working really well, and then after a week or so they're not working as well, and then, you know, people get hooked on them and they don't work anymore, and it can really ruin a lot of people's lives. And, you know, long term, it's really not that effective for the back pain either. Cayenne can actually be helpful for the back pain. Often in my practice, I would use it along with other things if it were something complicated or severe. But just putting a liniment made from Cayenne, which I'll tell you about how I make that here in just a few minutes, but putting that on the lower back around the area where the pain is can actually often really decrease the pain. So you have this warm sensation on the skin, this burning sensation on the skin, which is almost like having a heating pad on. It feels relaxing to the muscles underneath it, and it depletes the ability to feel pain in that area. So when you do have pain in that area, it's much decreased in intensity. So that's something that Cayenne, and that capsaicin, the substance in Cayenne, is still widely used for as an over-the-counter drug, and is very effective for as a topical herbal medicine. The automobiles are often really hard on, automobile collisions are often really hard on people's back muscles. The muscles that stabilize people in place tend to get overextended in ways that wouldn't naturally happen when people are in rear end collisions a lot of the time, and other collisions too. But you know, we've created machinery that's very capable of injuring us, in addition to its many convenient uses. It's also hazardous to human health, and you know, sometimes there are a lot of people out there with car wreck injuries that are maybe not debilitating, but maybe very persistent, that are just kind of things people live with. Cayenne can be really helpful for that. It can be taken internally too, to help with pain throughout the body, and to help with circulation throughout the body. So one really life-changing thing that I see with Cayenne is using it for neuropathy in the extremities. When people are losing feeling in their hands and feet, which sometimes happens as a result of diabetes, sometimes it happens for other reasons. If your body is heavier, then circulation has a harder time getting to your feet. If you're very tall, sometimes that too. Certain jobs, it's an occupational hazard of either, having your arms in an extended position typing for hours a day, or being on your feet on concrete for hours a day. So a lot of people have, especially as they get older, lack of feeling or lack of sensitivity in their hands and feet, which can lead to two really bad situations. One of which is falls. People aren't able to feel their feet, so they're not as able to balance with them and they fall. And another is non-healing sores, which is, kind of gnarly to talk about, but sometimes people will get something that would just be like a blister from a shoe or something like that, but it doesn't heal because their body can't feel that it's there. And so sometimes it turns into a big rotten spot that can lead to gangrene and amputations and all kinds of things. So Cayenne really helps with those situations. And you can actually sprinkle it directly into or on a sore, or you can use what I like to use is a liniment, which is basically made by cooking the cayenne in some oil. That helps to increase the circulation and helps to restore feeling in those kinds of areas. Often not perfectly, but often enough that people are not falling or getting non-healing sores, or that it can actually help to facilitate the healing of sores that have not been healing. So, and also minor fractures in the feet and things like that that are not healing, which are also a very common situation, especially in people who are walking around on concrete a lot, and especially when they start to get older and their bones become less flexible. So cayenne can be really life-changing and life-saving for those people, even though it's, it's just a spicy pepper. You don't really think of it as being necessarily an exotic drug or anything like that, but it is very powerful. It has a fairly unique, I won't say unique, but it has a fairly special strategy as far as how it works in the body. And that kind of spiciness is not really the same as what you would get from ginger, for example. So that's something that is really helpful for, and that can make a big difference to people's lives. The risks of cayenne are the same as the benefits, essentially, which is that it creates burning sensations in areas that it touches. So if someone is using cayenne liniment on their hands and then they rub their eyes, then it's going to burn in their eyes. Sometimes if people are taking it internally, it helps with circulation, but it can also burn in their digestive system, or they can feel it burning when they're having a bowel movement. And so, that's just, it's not dangerous. It won't blind you if you get it in your eyes. It'll just hurt. The potential for harm in just a regular type of strength of cayenne is pretty limited. Now, if you start working with things like a concentrated capsaicin, or something where it's like the essential oil of cayenne or something like that, then there's more of a potential for harm. But with just something that is no stronger than the pepper itself, that's not a concentrate of cayenne, but just an extract of it, then there's really not much of a potential that it's going to do anything other than cause irritation in places that it touches, which is, of course, what it's for. So, it's something that you do want to be careful with, because that's painful, but it's not dangerous in the sense of really being likely to cause any lasting injury. So taken internally, it helps circulation throughout the body and it helps pain throughout the body. It also helps to promote movement in the digestive tract. If somebody is not if somebody's having very little appetite and they're constipated, and this is something that you see in people with a very dry, cold constitution, especially old folks, but also some other people, often people who have been malnourished in the past. It kind of can tend to stick with people. Sometimes they'll just sort of have a cold constitution and not a lot of movement in their digestive system. So cayenne can really help with that. It can help the digestive system to produce more digestive juices, help the circulatory system to circulate more, and just kind of warms people up inside. So it's a really useful herb for that. It, like I said, it does induce sweating, so that is something that can also be used in the case of somebody who has like a chill or a fever with cold chills. A little bit of spiciness can really be helpful to them, whether it's just a little bit of cayenne in their chicken soup, or whether it's maybe taking cayenne in tincture form like this or something like that. It's pretty helpful. Often makes people feel less of the cold chills and body aches types of things, and also maybe makes breathing and digestion and stuff a little bit easier. So it's just kind of think of it as moving all the fluids in the body and helping all the fluids in the body to move more. So when you are using it, you want to take lots of water with it. Usually not a problem, because usually when somebody tastes cayenne, the first thing they want to do is get some water. But it is important to stay hydrated while you're using it so that it doesn't dry you out. But it's very good for helping to get all the fluids in the body to move, including blood and including sweat and including digestive juices. It's also, as you've probably noticed if you've ever eaten spicy food, if somebody has a lot of congestion in their sinuses that's not moving, like they feel like they've got a stuffy nose but nothing's coming out or whatever, cayenne can start to make that kind of drain. So that's a useful thing. Also, if somebody has an open sore and they take cayenne, a lot of the time the sore will drain a lot too. So that's something to be aware of that might happen, but it's not necessarily problematic. Sometimes it just means that they have to change the dressing on a wound more often or something like that, but it does tend to facilitate it healing better and with less scarring. And that's from using it internally. So using it internally, I'm using this form of it, which is a tincture. And what I've done here is I've just, actually what I've done in this case is I've taken fresh cayenne and cut the stems off of the top of the fruit and put it in a blender and blended it with 50% alcohol. So I'll take, like for example, a pound of cayenne and add to that 4 cups, in other words, about 2 pounds of the liquid, which is 50% alcohol, 50% water. So then blend that all together. If you're using powdered cayenne, it's kind of the same situation, except you'd probably use more like half a pound of the powder itself. So compared to 2 pints of the liquid. So that's and then once it's all mixed together, let it sit for a few weeks so that all the good stuff that's in the plant material gets out into the liquid. So that's how I make it for internal, for internal consumption, is an alcohol and water mixture. Capsaicin will dissolve in alcohol and water, and it will also dissolve in oil. So with oil, that's how I make it for topical use, to use on the skin. And I usually don't make it quite as concentrated. I'll usually take something like um, 2 tablespoons of cayenne powder to 8 ounces of oil. And you can add more than that if you want to. But basically, two tablespoons of 2 heaping tablespoons of cayenne powder in 8 ounces of oil. Mix it together, put it on stove, put it on like a low heat setting where it's kept warm, but it's not sizzling or anything like that. Just kept hot, warm for a couple hours, and then strain it. And that makes a red. I usually start out with an oil that's light colored. I like grapeseed oil because it doesn't have a lot of scent to it, but any kind of oil would work for what I'm describing. If you use coconut oil, you'll get a solid finished product. If you use grapeseed oil or sunflower seed oil, you'll get a liquid finished product. The coconut oil finished product is, it melts into your skin, but it's solid at room temperature. The other two are liquid at room temperature and are a little bit thinner once they get warm, soak into the skin a little more easily, or a little more deeply, I should say. So either one works about the same though. And then so you get a red or orangish color of oil that is very spicy. If you just touch it and taste it, it should taste very spicy. And then when you rub it on the skin, it's going to have a warming effect. If you use a lot of friction when rubbing it on, that will help enhance that warming effect. You can even scratch the skin with your nails and then rub it on after the skin has gotten warm and red. That will help it soak in very well. So that's cayenne liniment. It's a very warming, very useful type of thing. Like I said, you can use it on the lower back for lower back pain. You can use it on the feet for numbness or for pain. You can put a little bit of it on your cheeks to make your cheeks look brighter, maybe. But again, it's really safe. It's really useful. The only real downside is that it burns. And that's, also the main thing that you want it for. So it's something that's not really dangerous, but very powerful. You do want to treat it with respect. You do want to be careful with it because it can cause pain, but it doesn't really cause injury or damage. So that's an important distinction. It hurts, but it doesn't harm. I'll be back in just a moment. All right. All right. So yeah, that is kind of general overview of cayenne. So it's good for pain, good for circulation, good for movement of the fluids in the body, and good for helping to facilitate the cleansing processes in the body. It also does somewhat increase output of urine and bowel movements just because it is kind of spicy and because it is kind of making the fluids move. So it does do a lot to help facilitate all of that sort of thing. And it's what you would call a vasodilator. It causes the blood vessels to open up some when it's taken orally, when it's taken internally. If it's applied topically, where it's actually a much more concentrated thing, it actually will stop bleeding. I never use cayenne for that because I have other things I use for it, but cayenne powder on a wound to get it to stop bleeding is also a thing that can be done. So that's, it's a very safe, very readily available plant medicine with an enormous range, an enormous variety of things that it's good for, and that's very powerful, even though it's very safe. All right. So the next one that I want to talk about, much of that applies to as well, and that is garlic. Garlic is Allium sativum. It is bulb, and I'm sure you're all familiar with it as a vegetable, as a plant, as a thing that you can grow or buy at the store or whatever. The leaves are kind of grass-like. The bulb has multiple different cloves that can be separated out from a central stem. So sometimes people think of the bulb as being part of the root, and we could call it the root system because it's underground, but really the stuff at the bottom of the garlic clove of the head of garlic is the roots. The roots are these little hair-like things, and they're what's called contractile roots. So when garlic is growing in nature, or when it's growing, in the ground, those roots grow down into the ground, and when the ground is very wet, they contract and pull the bulb further into the ground. So garlic can actually dig itself deeper in by expanding and then contracting its roots. So plants, we tend to think of plants as being non-motile, like they don't walk around or whatever, but they do have their ways of moving themselves a bit. And so that's something that garlic does. When garlic grows, it has these grass-like leaves, and then it sends up a central stem, which will have a spherical cluster of flowers at the top of it. It's very lovely. It's a nice ornamental thing. But some varieties of garlic and some individual plants of garlic will have that stem and flowers at the top, and some will have that stem, and when it opens up, instead of being flowers, there's lots of little tiny bulbs. These are called bulbils, bulbil. And some of it has a combination of bulbs and flowers at the top. But when the bulbs are at the top, they fall off. And these are tiny little things, smaller than a lentil, somewhere bigger than a grain of rice, but smaller than a lentil. They fall all over the ground, and then they send down these contractile roots, and they dig themselves in. They plant themselves. So in this area, we have a couple of plants that people call wild garlic, one of which is ramps, Allium trichochum, and then another one of which is wild garlic or onion grass or wild onion, which is Allium vineale. And neither of them is the same species as the garden garlic. Garlic is Allium. Allium is this whole genus of onion type plants. Includes garlic, onions, shallots, the two things that I just mentioned, and a few others. But this whole genus of plants, Allium, and then sativum means cultivated. So it's a cultivated variety of garlic. It's not really quite the same plant as what occurs in the wild. And it's something that humans have cultivated and grown for in their gardens for thousands of years. So it's a very ancient crop. And as far as I know, it hasn't changed all that much in that amount of time. There are a lot of varieties of garlic out there, just like there are with a lot of other cultivated plants. There's one called Siberian garlic that is supposed to be fairly like a primordial version of garlic. It's very garlicky, it's strong, and it's not very specialized in any particular direction. There are some things like elephant garlic, which is a very large type of garlic. There are some other garlics that are more cultivated for their flowers rather than their bulbs. There are some milder garlics out there. But I like the Siberian garlic, which is nice and strong, or just, it's kind of like plain old garlic. But it's easy to grow. Like I said earlier, it's something that you can just kind of dig up the ground, put the bulbs in the ground, and then let it grow. And it will produce lots of garlic for you. It's usually a very successful crop because not a lot comes along and eats it. And so, like I said, the bulbs are not actually roots. They're actually layers and layers of leaf tissue that can grow up into the little green leafy stuff once it comes out of the top and grows up through the soil into the sunlight and so forth. Or it will sometimes grow that way while it's sitting on your shelf or in your pantry or whatever. But it's a very powerful medicine. And like cayenne, it's spicy and it opens up the blood vessels, helps to move the circulation. It's not as spicy as cayenne. It's hard to really get a burn feeling from garlic, although you can do a crushed garlic poultice and get some of the same effects that you would get from the cayenne liniment. But a lot of people find the smell of garlic objectionable because it's sulfury. So that's not a very popular remedy. But garlic is it's a vasodilator, so it's good for circulation. It's good for lowering the blood pressure. It may help to prevent deposits of cholesterol in the blood vessels. The thing that I use garlic the very most for in my own clinical practice is the fact that it has an extraordinary range of antibacterial properties. So garlic can be used internally for infections, for bacterial infections. And I've used it for a lot of things. There was a point in my practice where I was getting a lot of people referred to me who had methicillin-resistant Staph aureus, which at the time conventional medicine was not very successful in treating because people had used penicillin-type drugs for this common bacteria called staph for so long that the staph had become resistant to it, and they didn't really quite know how to deal with it. So at a certain point, I was actually getting a lot of people referred to me who had this type of infection because I was using stuff for it that was working. And the people who were referring people to me didn't really care what I was using. Like I tried to explain it to them and they just weren't that interested. But what I was using was garlic and myrrh. And garlic and myrrh are both herbs with a wide range of antibacterial properties. I was using both of them together to try and make sure that I was, covering as many possible bases as I could. But garlic by itself has been tested in vitro, in other words, in a petri dish, against dozens and dozens of different bacteria, and it seems to work against them all. That's a very different scenario than taking it internally in a human body, but it at least shows that the substances in garlic are destructive to those bacteria. And in my experience, garlic taken internally does help people recover from a wide variety of bacterial infections, which can include sinus infections, and it can include ear, nose, and throat type stuff, respiratory things. And, it's doing some of the same stuff that I was talking about with Cayenne in terms of being spicy and helping the fluids in the body move more. So it is working on a variety of different pathways in terms of helping the body to rid itself of infection, as well as being directly destructive to the bacteria themselves. So that's one of the I would consider an herb that's kind of essential. Not that it's the only herb that you could say this of, but it's essential to have in your herbal toolkit, in your repertoire of things you can do, something that will help treat bacterial infection, something that will help the body to fight off bacterial infection. And garlic is an excellent choice for that. Now, like I said, sometimes a poultice of crushed garlic is also used topically, which has the disadvantage of smelling really strongly, but it can be very effective. It can actually be irritating to the skin because of it being spicy, so that's something to be aware of. If you put sliced or chopped up or crushed garlic wrapped in gauze and then put it on a wound, it will kill the bacteria out of the wound. It will also really irritate the tissue around it, so it might look really red and that sort of thing. There's a question here which says, is the wild garlic and onion here just as medicinal? Yes, it is. It has the same medicinal properties in it, which are called isothiocyanates. Allyl isothiocyanate is the main one, and there's sulfur compounds. And then there's another thing called allicin, which is present both in the wild Allium venial, the field garlic that grows here, as well as in garden garlic. The downside to the wild stuff is that it is harder to get a pound of material from it, because the bulbs are very tiny and they are often buried pretty deep in very hard soil. Whereas if you plant garlic, you dig up the soil and the soil's loose, and then you pull the garlic itself up, and you have these nice big bulbs that are just a little deeper than what you planted them. And so it's not so laborious to get them out of the ground as it sometimes, but not always is with the wild stuff. Yeah, so green garlic is something you will also hear about sometimes in medicine. If you read especially historical texts about herbal medicine. And green garlic is the leaves of garlic, and it's something that's a little easier to harvest and that sort of thing while it's fresh. And it has some emollient properties, some soothing properties, as well as containing the sulfury stuff. So in the domestic medicine of Europe and Asia, where garlic is originally from, people would do a lot of things like giving someone a broth made of garlic to break up congestion. That's really strong, but it's really useful. Just taking a raw clove of garlic and chewing it up and swallowing it 3 times a day is a really good benefit to a lot of different conditions, because it will decongest, it will kill infections, and it will also help with, I'll say it will make things move in the digestive system. So that's something that some people avoid because of bad breath or whatever, but for the most part, I don't think that garlic usually causes bad breath just from taking it. I think a lot of the time it causes bad breath when people have eaten it and it's still in their mouth. So if you actually like drink afterwards and get the debris from it out of your mouth, maybe even rinse out your mouth, it's less likely to still smell on your breath. It can come out in your breath through your lungs, but sometimes that's not as noticeable. And another great thing about garlic is that it, keeps away vampires. If you take garlic on a regular basis, vampires will never bother you. But yeah, so all parts of the garlic plant contain the garlicky stuff, the sulfur compounds that make it do what it does. If you dry the bulbs and let them age, that sulfury stuff goes away and you get a non-scented garlic, or a very much less scented garlic, but it still has some of its blood pressure reducing properties. So it's got some properties that help reduce blood pressure that are not from the same stuff that makes it smell sulfury, that makes it smell oniony or garlicky. So a lot of the time, if you look at garlic supplements, sometimes they will say aged garlic, and that's what they're talking about. And so it's still good for that heart cardiovascular effect. It's not still good for some of its other properties, like helping the body to fight off infections or helping to break up congestion. Also, when it's used long-term, garlic sometimes will help with inflammation in the body. Those sulfur compounds that it contains are a different type of anti-inflammatory than most of the anti-inflammatories found in plants. So there are a lot of different classes of anti-inflammatories found in plants, and those ones are kind of in their own little category. So they sometimes will help with arthritis, sometimes with autoimmune conditions, particularly autoimmune conditions that don't involve the digestive system. Because if you're taking garlic on a inflamed IBS type of digestive system, then your body might not agree with it very well. It might be too irritating. But if you're taking it because you have a skin condition or a joint condition that is caused by the immune system being overactive and being destructive towards connective tissue, it can sometimes be helpful with that. It can often be helpful with that, but not right away. You have to use it for a month before you can expect to see much difference. So if I'm using garlic in that kind of context, I always start out with something else along with the garlic. Often I'll use it as a combination with other herbs that are other types of anti-inflammatories on an ongoing basis. So it's not the sort of thing, it's not like herbal ibuprofen or something like that where you're going to take it and feel better 20 minutes later. But over a longer period of time, it can have a long, slow effect on joint health, especially, and some other types of immune function. And some of that is it increasing and warming the tissue and increasing the circulation. And some of it is about the sulfur compounds reducing inflammation. So yeah, that category of herb is not as popular as it could be because of the smell and taste. Some people, kind of find it repulsive or whatever, but it is effective and it is powerful and it is very, very versatile and very easy to come by excellent quality material. And so that's something, that is definitely a very useful, versatile herbal ally to have, and a good thing to know about, a good medicine to be able to bring to the people close to you, because it's so versatile and so easy to do, easy to cause healing with, and difficult to cause harm with. And so, especially as you're getting started as a serious student of herbal medicine, those are the criteria that you want, the characteristics that you want in a medicinal plant. And garlic has them in a way that, to a degree that few other things do. All right. So, any questions about garlic? I mentioned before that you can plant it twice a year. You can plant it in November and harvest it in April or so. And then you can also plant it in around this time of year and then harvested it in the fall. How do you prepare it? So here's my favorite way to prepare garlic as an internal medicine is to take the whole cloves of garlic, just peel the papery part off of them, but the whole smooth clove of garlic, fill a jar up with that, and then, well, fill a jar about halfway up with it, and then fill it the rest of the way up with about 25% alcohol. So something that is maybe half vodka and half water, so that it's, if it was 50% alcohol vodka and then an equal amount of water, just so that if you got, like, for instance, if I had a jar this size, which is a half a gallon jar, or a 2,000, it's a 2-liter jar really. So if I filled it up to here to the 1,000 mark, the 1 liter mark, with garlic cloves, and then filled it the rest of the way up with liquid. And then it takes maybe a month, sometimes 2 months, before all the medicine from the bulbs works its way out into the tincture. If you chop it up first, the medicine gets into the tincture much faster, but it is a little bit different. It is a little bit, it's combined with the oxygen, and it's a little bit more acrid, a little bit more spicy that way. And it's a little bit less spicy and more sulfury, more oniony if you put them in whole. So that's how I usually do it, is to put them in whole, and really more like that's how I usually have my apprentice do it these days. But that's how I have usually done it, is to peel the papery part off of the bulb, put the bulbs in the jar, and then use twice as much liquid as plant material, and then let that extract for a couple months. And it will make a nice yellowish, slightly sticky feeling finished product that has a good strong garlicky scent to it. Garlic contains a bunch of different substances, but one of the things it contains is called urushiol, which is sort of like, it's what's called an oleoresin. So it contains some oils and some resins mixed together. And that's part of what makes it feel sticky and so forth. But it's yeah, that's sort of a long way of making garlic. You can also buy garlic granules and mix, which garlic granules are like dried powdered garlic, and mix that with the water, with the alcohol and water mixture, and then that will get the smaller pieces that the plant material is in, the more quickly the tincture will finish, the more quickly the tincture will get saturated with the stuff from the plant material that gives it its medicinal properties. So the way that I usually do it is slow, but I think that the finished product is slightly better. And a half-gallon jar of garlic will last a long time, because you don't really need it that often, and you don't really need that much of it. So you can give somebody, if you make a garlic tincture like that and you give somebody a teaspoon of it, that's like eating a whole clove of garlic. It's a lot of garlic. So you can use it sparingly and have it last a long time, and you can easily grow that much garlic in a pretty small space. And you could, if I was saying, I grow 2 3x6 garden beds of it, and I'll get much more than that from it. But that much is a decent amount that would last a while. The biggest downside for me with garlic as an herb in my practice, in my clinical practice, is adherence to the recommendation to use it, because a lot of the time people will be like, oh, I didn't like the way it tastes. So I always ask people, are you okay with how garlic tastes? And then I'll say, try and use this much of it. And sometimes people will and sometimes they won't. But I try and make sure that they're at least open to the possibility before suggesting it to them. Even though, like I said, it's a very safe and effective herb, some people just find the taste or the smell objectionable, or they're self-conscious about it or something like that. But yeah, it's an indispensable herb to be able to dispense. So it's one that I really recommend you get acquainted with, and maybe use yourself if you need it. It's like I said, even just having raw garlic and chewing up a clove of it and washing it down with some water. It's kind of intense flavor wise, but is really helpful for it's the sort of thing that I would do if I was starting to feel like I was getting a cold or something like that, to just try and keep it from developing into anything. It's a good plant to have around. There's a question, can you take too much garlic? Taking too much garlic would really just upset your stomach and maybe cause gas and bloating and some digestive cramping and that sort of thing. That's really the most it's going to do, though. It's not the sort of thing that any feasibly consumable quantity of is going to do you any real harm. And even getting to that point where it's causing discomfort for most people would take a very large amount, a very dedicated effort. So some people are more sensitive to it than others, though. So, but generally speaking, it's not something that is going to cause that has a lot of potential for damage or side effects or anything like that. So it's a very uncomplicated and very powerful plant medicine. All right. Well, any other questions about either of those two herbs or about the growing of plants in general? All right. Well, then I guess that's all for today. And thank you all for coming. And I will send out an email about the upcoming herb walk on the 27th. And if you're nearby, I hope that you can make that. Thank you. And I will see you back here same time next week.